purposes, what motivates his inclusion is that he was the protector, as it were, of reunified German psychotherapy. The Central Therapeutic Institute was run by his cousin, Matthias Goering, who was a psychiatrist who trained also as an Adlerian therapist. And because of the connection, the family connection, for example, one of the specialties of the Institute, especially in their theoretical work, as it were, attached to the Institute is also a clinic, where, of course, dealt with whatever the patients brought. But theoretically, one of the what belonged to the agenda was how certain potentially or neurotic reactions might affect the Air Force. Central to all of that, which I just throw out now for your future reference, was also the treatment in particular and in anticipation of homosexuality as something that could, like war neurosis itself or shell shock, afflict the Air Force, HEIR. But in any event, it was a double problem that interestingly the Berlin psychotherapists sought to solve, by reconstructing homosexuality as a neurosis. Because going into the alliance with various forms of psychotherapeutic treatment, it was the profound assumption that anything neurotic could be healed. So all that heiling also means in German, of course, healing. It was a community, intended to be a community of healing, as long as whatever the objectionable psychic disposition may be, could be reconstructed as neurosis, and that means treatable. Matthias Goering's son, who was in the Air Force at the time, the Nazi Air Force, trained as an analyst at the Psychotherapy Institute. Okay, and I just wanted to throw that footnote out, so we recognize his place here. Yeah.
On page 155 is Mr. Dick making a reference to Jung by saying it's our totem animal? I just found
that could be totem and taboo.
Okay. Now on page 47.
147 or
page 47.
47, sorry.
Out, and he's all three. He's a joke, a clown. This may be totally unrelated, but as far as what we've been talking about with in relation to social control and going back to the past and being unable to change it, is it perhaps because of the way that people think that people don't think as the fool, and that so perhaps it's that lack of foolish thought that prevents history in this context from remaining unchanged?
That prevents it from remaining
unchanged. So that if through the course of history that there's so many decisions or so many choices that people can make or can think of. I go back to Terminator, and when the janitor passed by and the Terminator only came up with so many choices, I think that fits well with what I'm suggesting here, that because people don't act foolishly.
So you're saying that remark about God's...
Well, I wonder if that could be taken as a reference to a fool right there.
I mean, the fool is an important figure in other works by Dick. They have a certain relationship to language, for example. And I'm thinking of the Galactic Popular, for example. And he was thinking when he would cite the fool of certain Wagnerian and Jungian fantasies in which the fool does play. If you look at the entire work, I think it's justified to say that. I mean, that's part of the flotsam of fantasy that I tried to address before, that you find in Dick often, as I said, the untenable place of a kind of false ending. But, the fool has that valorization. It's a little confusing here because it's not clear whether this is an aspersion that is societal, for example, or because Gerling is the other fool in this account.
So I haven't finished Simulacra, but you mentioned something which was that civil war becomes the figure of unmitigated loss, and that the organizing of politics is simply around the management of kind of automated psychopathic violence, and that so then the site of loss, I'm trying to identify the fetish. Okay, so the trauma for which the cycle will continuously unfurl is this dependence on reversion back into psychopathic creates the work. But where's the borderline fetishistic object that sustains that, if there is one identified?
Yeah.
I would maybe venture a guess that possibly, at least in this novel, maybe it's the secret in a certain sense.
That's good.
Because it becomes sort of, at least for those who don't know the secret, it becomes this sort of fetish that structures the entire system.
Yeah, the secret, as language, but also something secreted away, that has some kind of substance somehow. It's not so much here, but the android participates a little bit in that. The android is part of the secret, but that's part of the substance. And it's carried forward all the way to the false ending, as it were, because the Chuppers, when they're first observed, are compared to androids. Remember, it was just asked the simulated creature from Mars kind of android is at the same time the placeholder of a totemic relation through animals to the ancestors, as it were. Yet animals are virtually extinct and also disallowed from the co-ops and so on, as addressed above. So, possibly this conjunction between totemism proper and this electric sheep that we're not allowed to drink, has a fetishistic quality to it. But ultimately, you're right. The bottom line, like Shell Beach, would be the secret behind this, which in the German original participates in the whole relay of words and sounds going into this one handedly too, of course. Yeah.
On page 161, in the middle of the page, is there any significance to Nazi history when Mr. Dick mentions All Souls, the All Souls meeting?
No, I think that's. I don't know. What is All Souls? Is there anyone who knows the German holidays? Is All Souls not the English version of Halloween or something? No, they're not. I don't think they were. Unless, is it in the still in the English setting an opportunity to visit the graves of family members? No.
So sort of All Souls Day commemorates the faithful departed from Christianity.
You said the day.
Commemorates the faithful departed. Faithful departed.
And what's it called in German? It is Allerheiligen? That's all saints. Is that a separate?
So it's, it says at least in the Anglican Church, All Souls Day was fused with All Saints Day.
Well, anyway, it's not. It doesn't have striking significance. The Nazi sign.
I was curious about the point you made. I think it was quoting Gunther about the relation between the discovery of the new land in the West and the possibility of imagining science fiction and robotic consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remembered Civilization and its Discontents, where Freud, from what I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, claims that civilization had, let's say, a moment of shock or of discontent with itself when it meets those primitive people that live so simply and are so happy. And as if the encounter with a more simple form of life makes possible to think itself differently or something like that.
That's good. I mean, he's talking about the ambivalent valorization of the noble savage that begins in the Enlightenment, I suppose. Continues from there. It's good that you mentioned that because it reminds us the extent to which there were these contacts throughout so-called modern history with so-called primitive civilization. But the example that Freud gives is, where it's the simplicity is a kind of rebuke that throws us upon our own civilization as a series of ultimately psychological impasses or hindrances with regard to happiness. I'm pretty sure he underscores it. He certainly does in Totem and Taboo that's our projection. As he says in Totem and Taboo. If you look closely at so-called primitive societies, they are enmeshed in restrictions upon happiness. Okay. Oh, yeah, sorry.
I was just wondering if you could maybe say something quickly about what you were saying about Dick and his sister in terms of mourning and unmourning, and just maybe that relationship of maintaining that relationship through mourning or unmourning.
Now, the reason I stress that it's mythic and or psychotic is that it doesn't fit the usual profile of mourning or unmourning. It is possible to have deposited in one an infant sister, but not because of your relationship to that being. Would only be conceivable if the mother, in her grief or her inability to address that grief, this actually happens frequently enough, would have deposited that loss inside P.K. Dick, so that with the surviving child, the other missing child would also live on encrypted, the soul surviving. But I don't think it's that sort of a thing in this case. Instead, I don't know at what point in his life, but at some point, around the time he discovers that he's a writer, I suppose, he fixes upon this setting of his own origin, as it were, anyway. I should add that, and that's why I think it develops later on, like in adolescence or something, because it's also the narrative that allows him to articulate his loathing for his own mother. He feels that she's responsible for Jane's death. But what's more important, I think, is that he makes the decision that then organizes his being writing. And the decision he makes is that the encounter with loss is not a one-way, or as I said, transitive sentencing. It's simply wrong, he says, to say that the survivor has lost someone. He says that when there is any loss, there are two parties to that loss forever. So that's his organizing scene. And you can track back to that, as I said, notably his use of alternate present realities, as well as other concerns that can be more or less convincingly brought under the aegis of allegory. And I mean now Benjamin's understanding of allegory, for what that's worth. Most importantly, and that's what I wanted to motivate now, is that in his world or work, the various incursions of alternate present reality are the signs of this mutual loss and mutual remembrance, this holding pattern in the loss of remembrance. Okay, well, let's have a look at alphabet. I think it's 64. So, we have here, I think, another allegorical continuity shot with the Third Reich. Once again, gone to outer space this time without ever leaving Paris. But in a film like this, where words as signs of particular powers, displacing powers, doesn't really matter where you in that identifiable sense. Where we are, it's Paris, and it's in outer space, Alphaville. We have I'll just put it this way, it seems like a thrown together makeshift reproduction of totalitarianisms, complete with props that are also literary citations, like the Bible that is a dictionary of an ever-diminishing or streamlined language, is of course a reference to 1984. Just about everything in the film, this is important to identify, carries a literary or film reference. But in the midst of that allegorical texture, that citational texture, we find installed Werner von Braun, who was, however, at one point Leonard Nosferatu. We have a staging of fascist justice, right down to the balletic swim gesture, that's sort of reminiscent of Lenny Leibniz stuff. But in the mix of recognizable references, I would argue that it's not clear who lives in Alphaville. It's not clear whether these are throwbacks to the Third Reich within the logic of this film, or if it's a throwback to a less a less oppositional distribution of losses. Certainly, what the film is about is the relationship between words and identifiable representations, icons, and affect. The film proposes to be between the word or the command as the prohibition of affect and the arrival of affect at the end of the film. Natasha von Braun is able to feel, I suppose, but certainly declare her affective relationship at the end, which is how it has to end. The people are punished for going against the logical order of splitting off of affect from words and representations. The conceit here, the fiction is that the functioning of this society as a logical functioning has to inhabit this precise space between the sign and affect, which means it's also that moment of shock before mourning can commence. It's that space of literally of central integration that we enter, as it were, where in the bric-a-brac of citations and representations of various kinds of constraint, one has the sense, basically, that what is being held back is the grief that her, Natasha's, declaration of affect does not fulfill or realize, but it marks the onset of the capacity of this film and whatever survives in this film to experience grief, address grief. Alphaville pretty much collapses because we're switching to the new order of grieving at the level of plot, as it were. It's because the protagonist has used poetry, which equals affect, even love in this film, has used poetry to short-circuit, as you saw, the memory units of the computer that governs this new logical order. So this film that we're just considering in closing now is not as much about the psychotic space of rewiring for survival. This film, like the book, 1984, I think, presents totalitarianism and its immediate aftermath as a doomed space, a space of non-survival, doomed by these basic manipulations via language of the connection between sign and affect, or within a greater picture, the way in which everything here conspires to prohibit the onset of mourning. All these words that are concepts like assimilation, that the Americans, the Swedes, and the Germans are so good at, integration. All these terms are used here as part of the machinery to keep that gap in place. Impossibly, of course. As we encounter it on so many levels, including that of the seductresses of the various levels, everything here just fills in for the time being of this separation or gap that has to be preserved. I'm reminded in this film of the James Bond franchise that opened up right before this film. I think that's the motivation also for the detective, who's somewhat citational. He also has an 00 number early in the film. He's 003. And here I have to step out of the film and explore the citation because, as you may know, for the very first two films, for which Ian Fleming was still alive and in attendance, the Cold War opposition of the narratives gave way to the organization Spectre. Spectre dominates in Dr. No and From Russia with Love, even though in the narratives that the films adapted still followed the opposition of the Cold War. So Spectre is the third party that manipulates the Cold War opposition in order to create another kind of power, a spectral power that is unexpected and unidentified in so many ways. This ghostly organization or underworld is what I see as inspiring Alphaville in its particular position before morning, between the sign and the affect kind of position that while it tries to block morning, also in a sense spectrally holds the place of it. Like I said, Alphaville is doomed, and the film brings that doom to its conclusion. But if we think about the organization of Spectre now, especially as it flashed before our eyes in the very first two films, and it's carried forward now more recently when the franchise reopened with Quantum, it's a spectral underworld that organizes Bond's existence and can't at the same time be superimposed onto his interpersonal relations and his need to mourn, say, Vesper Lind. So what Spectre posits, especially because there is in the foreground another kind of relationship in and to mourning that Spectre does not subsume, it postulates some underworld that has now come up out of the former Cold War opposition and reveals itself. And it reveals itself really as the underworld of World War II. If you look at the representations of the criminal masterminds, or even if you look at their proper names, you see that it's a weird hybridization of victims, persecutors, and silent majorities. It's simply everyone who died from 1932 to 1945. And there is that kind of non-oppositional underworld quality to Alphaville as well, I think, in spite of the pressing identifiable markers. They're often in a kind of contradiction with markers from other provinces of the same history. So the film, in its satirical way, in its ironic way of addressing some of these issues and processes like integration and assimilation and so on, nevertheless, I think holds the place of the disaster of World War II and the years leading up to World War II. Holds the place of that, like or as a kind of spectre organization or underworld. That Godard, he didn't want to open up a franchise, so he let Spectre fold so that affect can be expressed and resituated within the Vesperland relationship. That's his difference from the bond structure that I was trying to evoke as I cited in parallel. For Godard, precisely just as the French are excluded from the litany of the assimilated, this gesture of desire, the French word and concept, is what is allowed to take us across the threshold of an impasse and of a devastating warning assignment. So it's another take, kind of semiotic take, and certainly a cinematic one, that investigates the terrain and stricken world that we're looking at again and again outside psychosis this time around, and in proximity to a successful closure. A certain kind of affirmation outside the sci-fi complex takes place here in Godard's film, which is a good upbeat message to take along with you to Venice. Okay.